wander by. So here we go. Oh, last thing, I'll do all the music and imaging afterwards. So it's going to be dry.
Okay.
Welcome to the Bite Meat podcast. And you guys, I love doing this. One of my favorite hours of the week, even though I have a day job, because we talk about barbecue. We talk about all the tips, and we're all learning. It's like fishing. You learn something new every time you go out fishing. Same thing with barbecue. And we've had some great guests that I know have helped a lot of our listeners. And great one here. We've been looking forward to this. I mentioned it last week. Jess Pryles, you know her from Hardcore Carnivore and some of the great work that she does in Austin, Texas. I'm a dummy. You guys probably know that already. I don't know why I thought you were in Florida, Jess. But Jess, I do want to get started just with some of the great things that you have going on, you know, and your story. As much as anything, spoiler alert, I want to talk a lot today about open flame cooking.
Cool.
I think you know a thing or two about that, and we'll get there. And that's not something we've covered a lot. I mean, we've had everyone from Aaron Franklin to Leonard Botello to all the big names in here, and I'm like, I got to get Jess on. And so thank you to Texas Star Grill Shop for getting me your information. And of course, Texas Star Grill Shop presents the Bite Meat podcast every week. Don't forget to subscribe on Podbean, on iTunes, on Spotify, wherever you can get a podcast, you can get this podcast. And let's get into it, man. I don't want to waste your time. I don't want to waste any time and get some of this. But your story is pretty incredible. Obviously, some people know it maybe, you know, peripherally, but you committed to this, and you committed with a lifestyle change. I mean, it's one thing to say, yeah, I'm into this, and you're in your backyard and you do a pop-up trailer or something. Tell us about that.
I mean, the very short version of it is I'm originally from Australia. I moved to the States in 2015, and I moved for barbecue. I had been traveling through Texas just as a tourist, tasted barbecue, loved it, wanted to learn eventually how it was made. And in learning how it was made, sort of unlocked all of these other amazing things about meat in general and how to choose it and how to cook it. And, you know, here we are sort of 15 plus years after my first ever trip to Texas. And I live here. I'm married a Texan, have this company, Hardcore Carnivore, teach other people how to barbecue and do all kinds of live fire grilling. And I even went back to school and got a certificate in meat science. So
yeah, I saw that.
Together.
Yeah, that's an added dimension to the commitment. Now, I have actually spent a good amount of time in Australia, visited there, and I covered the 2000 Olympics. So I was there for like 34 days.
Wow.
In 2000. My day job, if you don't know, some of our listeners do, is I'm a writer and a broadcaster. So I got to cover a bunch of Olympics, and I remember searching out Barbie, yeah, so to speak, you know, and it's kind of a running joke, you know, but it is different there. So I wanted to start there, and I don't know how much you've talked about this, transitioning from what you knew growing up to Texas barbecue. Kind of a culture shock, or was it just intrigue, or what was the differences there?
Yeah, I mean, there was really no Australian barbecue culture before that. There is a really healthy one now that is based off the US style. So because, you know, offset cookers and pellet grills and things like that, based on traditional American and Texan methods, but now they've started to incorporate a lot of Australian ingredients, things like that, or ingredients that you can get locally there. Because, you know, you couldn't get a fresh jalapeno pepper there very easily 10, 15 years ago. So that's really, there was no strong barbecue or even grilling culture, and they use the word barbecue to refer to both. But there is now. So really, it was just, you know, when you come to Texas, one of the things you do as a tourist is eat barbecue. So that's where it started more than anything. And I started nearly from ground zero, without any experience learning how to cook. My dad used a gas grill. He used to cremate the steaks to well done. And so,
no offense.
Yeah, and so part of all of this journey has been turning into someone who knows what to ask for at the meat counter and understands which steak is what. And that was really empowering. And that's what I started sharing with my audience. And that's a lot of the same videos that you'll see me make today, is just little tidbits of information, not just on cooking, but how to choose meat, you know, why meat is a certain color, all that good stuff.
What was the intrigue with Texas barbecue? I mean, you could have gone anywhere. I'm intrigued by Carolina. I'm intrigued by Memphis. I'm intrigued by California. But for you, when you came here as a tourist, What was the, not light bulb moment, but what really hooked you?
I mean, I think honestly, the biggest variable is that it's beef based. It's my favorite protein. I think it's got the most flavor. I mean, I love all meat, but you know, who can say no to a steak, right? So to get that steakiness and beefiness of brisket, just I think made it a more superior style.
I did go down the rabbit hole of some of your videos, and the steaks were incredible. And as I mentioned at the top, I learned a lot. But let's start somewhere else other than steak. The kind of the risk reward of, you call it live fire, I call it open fire. Doesn't matter. It's the same thing. That method. I love every aspect of what you do, and what I love the most is I kind of grew up with that with my dad, who was my influence when I was a little guy. And it's old school and it's challenging. But what are some of the other, like steaks? Everybody tries to cook steak, some better than others. We know that. But other things that you really feel strongly about are open flame, live fire. It's better. It's better on a live fire.
All lamb. I grew up eating a lot of lamb, and I just think it performs so well with charcoal in any iteration, whether it's like rotisserie style or direct grilling. But you know, steaks, as you mentioned, the most obvious one. I think anything tastes better on the grill, quite frankly. Like you can make really nice chicken thighs in a pan, but are they going to taste as good as cooking them over charcoal? Probably not. I think it's more what I ended up leaning into that a lot of my followers know me for is a method called just keep flipping.
Yeah, so I'm going to get to that. That's great. Go ahead.
Yeah. So talking about that method, and I try and teach people, it's less about the protein because you can cook just about anything on a grill, and more about that setup. And splitting your grill into two areas where the heat's just on one side. So putting all your coals to one side, it just gives you, especially if you're learning to grill, so much more confidence, because if something goes wrong, you just pull it across to that cool side, you know? So I think it's more about the how rather than the what can you cook.
And since we're here, let's get to just keep flipping because it does tie in with the steaks as well. It's very intriguing because, as you mentioned, you can control the heat, but it's also counterintuitive to what a lot of the culture is now. Oh, reverse sear, or 5 minutes here and 5 minutes there. What is the benefit of just keep flipping? And I will say, I encourage our listeners not just to listen to this podcast, but go watch your videos on this, because it had me intrigued. What is the science behind that? What is the benefit?
I appreciate it. I mean, when I say the science behind it, it's not like I tested it in the lab or anything like that. I think we see it, this is important as well. We see a lot of videos that we're shown online of someone saying, I tested how much juice comes out of my meat because I put a paper towel underneath it and then I weighed the paper towel. Like, that is not how a scientific experiment is conducted, nor do you have instruments fine enough to do that. So I will say this: reverse sear, which is that style, if your listeners aren't familiar, of cooking something at a really low temperature and then searing it really quickly, kind of came about because it's very foolproof. It's very easy to get a great result, especially on a thick steak like a tomahawk or a roast. But more than anything, I think we started getting into this romanticized place where medium rare was the be all and end all, that had a lot to do with the rise of social media and visually seeing your steaks. So it wasn't just about a crosshatch on the outside anymore, as we've been used to seeing in steakhouse advertisements. It was more about what does that internal look like, and reverse sear got you that. The problem is it also encouraged people to make sure you don't sear it for too long, because you don't want to, you don't want to miss that perfect medium rare sensor. And what was happening for me personally is I was learning to grill. I wasn't getting a great crust on the steak, because most of us don't have the same equipment as they have in a steakhouse with these really high temperature salamanders or broilers with really intense exhaust fans, which is really important. I think a lot of us are scared about having
flare ups and
exactly. And so I wasn't getting that crust that makes steak so wonderful. And I found myself naturally cooking in a style of concentrating all of my heat and building up my coals to get them really hot and moving that steak constantly. And every time you move it, the surface dries out and allows that sear to continue to happen. But because I keep flipping it, and I'm talking every 30 or 45 seconds, you get to build that crust without having that gray band kind of come in, and none of it is overcooked. So Yeah, it's quick, it's efficient, and you get a great crust. And I'm an impatient person, so I just naturally started cooking that way and told other people about it.
Yeah, you don't want to get too much into the slow smoke if you're an impatient person.
Right.
That's for sure. Couple things on that though, just to follow up. I've found, and I have done the just keep flipping here about in the last 2 years. Just if I think it's juicier, which again maybe it might be a little counterintuitive to people, but is that correct, and why is that?
I think for a lot of us, there's a lot of cognitive dissonance that goes on when we eat food. Like if you ask people what their favorite meal is, oftentimes it's connected to a travel experience or a family experience, and that has probably helped influence how good the actual meal was. So from a meat science perspective, any kind of rare to medium rare steak will always be more juicy than a well done, because you're literally cooking the water out of it. So moving it fast like that and keeping it medium rare could have that influence. But and then there's the argument about resting the steak as well. So there's nothing that specifically says that method should keep it more juicy than a reverse sear, because it's kind of same but different, in reverse, literally. But it may be as simple as, honestly, like that instant gratification of getting to eat so much faster. You're salivating, you're hungry, and it just honestly, it can help temper that experience.
Yeah, no, I get you, and the crust, of course, is the game changer, right?
Yes.
I mean, I'm sure that's what you get most of your compliments on. But when I unmuted there for a second. I'll edit this out. The crust, of course, is the difference. But when you're doing that, the crust that scares most people off, right? That from the open live fire, because they think, oh, I'm burning it.
I think so. And I have a seasoning called Hardcore Carnivore Black. That was the first one I came out with. That's our bestseller. That's jet black in color. So oftentimes people that are unfamiliar about it, even though a lot of people use it, will see it for the first time and think that it's burnt because of the color. I think that also comes under the realm of personal preference. Like you look at a lot of sort of northern Mexico style grilling, and it's, an asada with a lot of kind of crispy charcoal edges. If you go down to deep South Texas, you'll find bone-in thin sliced brisket that's designed to be grilled. Now, it's not going to be tender like filet. It's going to have some chew to it, but just like tablitas, flanking cut ribs, like there are these cuts where you don't mind having a little bit of chew, a little bit of crust, a little bit of charcoal on them, because they have so much more flavor. So for me personally, I love a true char grill. It's definitely not burnt. You can taste the difference when it's burned, but there's nothing sadder to me than a barely seared steak. You're just missing out on so much flavor.
Now you're just speaking my language, because my mother's from Mexico, and I was born in San Antonio, so I'm all about the crispy crust. But okay, so you mentioned lamb. We talked about steaks. Fajitas are another one that is very much a live fire. What have you experimented with on live fire that maybe is a little unconventional? Because I know there are other things that can be done there if you're doing it the right way.
Yeah, I mean, I've cooked just about everything, turkeys, whole turkeys, spatchcock turkeys, breasts, because we obviously get heavy into doing that when it comes to the holidays. People also, I think, can often overlook it as really a more flavorful oven. So you don't necessarily have to be over direct heat. You can put something in a foil pan in there, allow it to melt, allow it to roast, whatever it is. There really isn't anything you cannot do on a grill. It doesn't have to be limited to the protein, as I was saying.
That's where I wanted to go with this, because I think a lot of our listeners are just conditioned otherwise. The other thing that I find fascinating is the meat myth busting. And I've talked to a lot of people about the most important thing you do is before you even light your grill, and that's the meat. But what are some of the myths that might be associated with that you constantly, whether it's at a class at Texas Star Grill Shop or with your videos or whatever, you're constantly saying, no, this is the right way. Trust me on that. Like some of the meat myths that people like me and other people might have.
Yeah, sure. Look, I think it starts, as you said, before the cook. I do recommend taking the meat out of the fridge about 20 minutes beforehand. It does not come up to room temperature. So that will never happen. To do that, you'd have to leave it out for hours, and then you have a food safety issue. But what that 20 minutes does is it lets any kind of moisture come to the surface as it's kind of it's condensation or it's getting equilibrium. I can never get that word right. It's in equilibrium with its environment. And so what you can do is then pat that dry, and that'll give you a great start to cook with, because that Maillard reaction, which is what happens when we brown meat, is going to happen in the absence of surface moisture. So take it out a little bit before, pat it dry before you cook it. Use a meat thermometer to check for doneness and food safety. It's the best way, rather than the pinch method, to know exactly where your steak is at, or exactly if your chicken is cooked safely as well. And then the other thing that I like to say, which is not related to meat but charcoal, is if you're using charcoal in a charcoal chimney, which I love to do, oftentimes you'll hear people say to wait until the charcoal is ashed over on top to pour it out. But if you do that, everything underneath it in the chimney is nearly spent. So I like to wait until the layer just before the top layer is just lit. You can dump it out. The lit coals end up on top of anything that's waiting to be lit, and you get a little more heat out of that way.
Okay, that's good. And you mentioned the fire source. I've gotten this messaging from several people. Sometimes people overthink the sourcing of the fire. I know you have used briquettes extensively. Are they underrated? Because they seem a little underrated to me in terms of, like, you can always use smoke flavors on top of the briquettes, correct?
Yeah, I mean, and I think it's okay to approach them as two different flavors. You get a unique flavor from the fat dripping down into coals, whether it's briquettes or live fire wood coals, that then creates different compounds of scent that perfumes the food, that gives you a different flavor experience. So I am an ambassador for Kingsford and have been for many, many years. And I can tell you, there are times that I have cooked on other people's charcoal because we've done tests behind the scenes to see how they stack up. There are times that I cook on regular wood-fired charcoal, and it's very organic and it's very back to nature, and it's lovely as well. But what I experience when I use briquettes, and I don't like to use Matchlight, I pretty much just use Kingsford Original for nearly everything, is a consistency. I know how it's going to burn. I know how it's going to light. I know how hot it's going to be, and I know what I'm going to cook with. When I started to go into some of the other brands, I started to see a real difference with that cooking style, like how reliable that heat source was. So there is a difference, but they're engineered. I've spent a lot of time in their R&D department because, like a lot of people, I think we get told, oh, it's full of powder, it's full of stuff that they don't, they put in there to make sure that they don't have to keep their prices too high or whatever. And the reality is, it is an engineered product designed for longer burning. So you get great performance out of it. Whereas, as you know, if you try and light green wood, forget it, right? But a bag of charcoal will never let you down.
What's the downside to Matchlight?
For me personally, I do detect a flavor because of the accelerant in it. I know a lot of people can't. And then the other thing is, because it does have an accelerant through it, you're gonna burn through it quicker.
Yeah. And the other thing about briquettes is, and obviously I know you are loyal to Kingsford, and they're awesome. But there's just a better quality now than the old days. It might be an old train of thought that people have, like the old briquettes. Today's briquettes are entirely different.
Yeah, I mean, they're all American made. They have 4 plants around here. And trust me, I've tried a lot of competitors. They get me to try the competitors, and there's a performance issue. I didn't mean to make this into an ad. It's just
no.
I mean,
it's about learning.
It's about learning, and I will tell you this. For the people who have followed me for a long time, and anyone new who might be listening who starts following me, one thing you can rely on for me is a no BS policy. I will not sell you products that I do not personally use or believe in. I think there's a lot of that around now these days, and I think it's unethical to ask people to spend money on things that don't work as well.
I totally agree. When we get advertisers on these podcasts that I do, I'm like, well, I gotta know what it is. I gotta try it. I gotta get my hands on it and use it, whether it's fishing or barbecue or whatever. Another message that I think a lot of listeners are picking up on here with our conversation is, don't be afraid to take a chance, whether it's cooking with the live fire or using briquettes or all this. Is that something that you see a lot? Because I have a follow up on this that I think is gonna tie in, but people just don't take the chances.
Yeah, I think that it's intimidating for a lot of people. If you didn't grow up with a dad to teach you how to grill, it just seems too hard too dirty, too complicated. And when you think about it, using a charcoal chimney, for example, is super easy. I think it's the same reason that pellet grills have revolutionized barbecue and it made it accessible for so many people. When you make it about the cooking of the food and not the running of the apparatus, which is what pellet grills did, where you can just plug and play, it opens it up to so many new people in that playing field. So, all of these advances are good advances because it gets more people outdoor cooking.
Yeah, I mean, and you're kind of in my head right now because that's the follow up I was going to have.
Sorry,
you're a witch, is what you are. But anyway, I was going to talk about these crutches, and maybe it's not something that ultimately you swear by, but these crutches get more people saying, "Hey, I can do this." And the ones I mentioned, and maybe you have others, are pellet grills. Like people who have pellet grills that have never cooked before are all of a sudden getting the bug. I think foil or peach paper. They're like, oh, that helps it. Is there anything else that may? I had reverse searing on there, but we talked about that already. But these are not necessarily, you're cheating or it's a crutch or something like that. These are things that ultimately can advance your game, correct?
Very much so. If let's look at your example of the crutch, the foil versus the peach paper. We know that there is a phenomena that happens called the stall during cooking smoking pieces of meat for a long time. And it's, once the humidity of the chamber reaches a certain amount, that meat temperature stalls out. So if why push it uphill? There's only a certain maximum smoke absorption that things can take. Let's say if we're using a pork butt, right? We're using a pork butt. Let's say it's been in smoke for 5-6 hours. You've got a great bark on it. That's all there. The only thing you're waiting for it to do at this time is get tender. So if you're going to speed up tenderness and get over that stall by wrapping it in foil, rock and roll. Use that as a tool. The reason that we wouldn't do that with the brisket is really interesting. We don't think about bark on a pork butt the same as we do on a brisket. That hallmark Texas really salty, peppery, coarse bark. And that is, I think, one thing that we look for in this modern Texas style brisket. If you were to foil a brisket completely, because there is a method where you just do it in a boat that Evan Leroy came up with. If you were to foil it completely, what you end up doing is sort of steaming off that bark. And so someone figured out that if you use butcher's paper, which is porous and allows for some airflow, you can still hold on to that bark that you've worked so hard to create. So again, it's not that cheating aspect, it's understanding what are these extra tools that are now available to us that can move things forward.
Yeah, and it allows some of the moisture and smoke to come out as well, correct? So let's talk about it. You mentioned some of the people who are innovators here. I know John Mueller was an influence of yours.
Yeah, he was the first person to teach me how to barbecue. So he had a trailer in Austin at the time called J. Miller Barbecue, which then became La Barbecue once he moved on to a different project. Of course, La Barbecue's still around. So he was taught by his dad, Bobby Miller, of the very famous Louis Miller Barbecue in Taylor, Texas. And, he couldn't do much aside from barbecue, but that was definitely in his blood. So it was interesting watching that happen.
What are some other influences that really have kind of stepped up your game and opened your eyes, even though you're innovating things yourself?
Yeah, I mean, I think Aaron Franklin has to get a nod just because he was, in my opinion, the first person who stepped up and applied chef level minimums to food. So if it wasn't good enough, he wasn't going to serve it. Whereas traditional barbecue restaurants were like, I cooked it, so I got to serve it, whether it's good or not. So he elevated the standard. He pushed past things, especially in terms of resting. Like the whole concept of purposefully resting a brisket for an extended time, I think has everything, I would say, to do with Aaron and his experimentation in this pursuit of brisket greatness. So
I mean, people are resting briskets 12 and 20 hours these days. And it makes a big difference. All right, so let me get into some specific thing here. Again, I always try to get something that our listeners never heard before, and that is a spit over an open flame. That is something that, frankly, we haven't talked about, and I would like for you. You can pick the meat, but what are your steps? What is the Jess Pryles? Oh my gosh, I'm going to do that just like her technique for a spit over an open flame?
So I grew up in Melbourne, Australia. We have the biggest population of Greeks outside of Athens.
Okay.
And one thing that's really, really common there, especially for like parties and maybe having your family around on the weekend, is lamb on a spit, whole lamb on a charcoal spit. And it is the same thing. It's less about the meat, whether you're doing porchetta or lamb or picanha, which is that great cut you see in Brazilian restaurants, which is that same rotisserie. It's less about the protein and more about your fire and where you're putting it. So if you think about something like a whole lamb, you got thick shoulders, delicate belly, and then thick hams or hind legs.
Yeah.
And so what you would want to do is make sure that your coals are under those large parts, but not as much under the middle. Same concept if you've ever seen someone talk about whole hog, it's that distribution of the fire.
Yes.
You also want a sauce where you can replenish those coals if they die. So again, referring back to whole hog cookery, they usually have something called a burn barrel where they'll set it up to constantly add wood and be making coals. So when they're ready to scoop more coals in, it's available to them. So all of that becomes about managing the fire and figuring that out. And once you've had a few turns at that, you can apply it to just about any meat.
And how long would you cook a whole lamb? I'm just curious.
It usually takes around 5 to 6 hours.
All right, that's not as long as I thought it would be.
Yeah.
And then you have at it. Then you have some really good lamb.
Oh yeah.
All right, so I want to talk about this too. The power of social media. You've become a social media star, and again, I would encourage people to look at your videos because I've known of you for quite a while, but I really dug in the last month, and it's fascinating stuff. It's very educational, but this is something that when you're sharing secrets, this is also counter to what the old school barbecue masters used to do, and now everybody seems to do it. It's a great culture. It's a great community. What was your light bulb moment? How have you embraced, the social media aspect of all this?
I mean,
other than entirely.
Well, I was posting on social media before a creator and influencer were words, and certainly before they were careers. And it was just about sort of sharing what I was learning, sharing the stories, sharing the recipes. I think you touched on an interesting point, which is what I would love to hone in on real quick, which is it started off with everyone kind of what they call now gatekeeping, keeping those secrets, never letting the secrets go. And then it became a much more kind of community-based thing where it's like, well, I was learning things, so why shouldn't I share it with someone? And what I will say is this, the pendulum has swung so far the other way that what I would caution for people is you need to be critical about what you consume on social media because some people are overcomplicating things to get the views. So it's less about, because there's so much like pressure for views and numbers and paid, didn't used to be like that. And so I think a lot of people are creating videos that are, unattainable, or they like wheel in a stunt brisket that wasn't actually from their cook, or, they're telling you to inject and prod and wrap, and the beef tallow in the paper thing is
don't get me started.
You don't need to do that, but it makes for a great video. So I would say, somewhere in between telling none of the secrets and going too far over the top lies where you need to be for your cooking.
And look for sincerity. Like that. That's what I search for. Like when I post a video, and I'm not you or Jeremy Yoder, who we're going to have on next week, mad scientist and all that stuff. But I always feel, I'm comfortable. I've been doing it for 40, plus years that of certain things I do. But I've posted videos, and then I see a similar video, just kind of, checks and balances, wonder how other people are doing it. And I'm like, that's nothing like I would do it. And I don't know if that would work. Certain people are in it for the social media. You have to find the sincere, legitimate people that are living it, right?
I think so. I think it's really easy to tell when someone is doing something grandiose for views and when they're just sharing a recipe that might actually work.
All right, so let's talk about Hardcore Carnivore before I let you go here. Another great hit. And what's coming down the pike? What do you have right now where people can find it?
Well, the funny thing is, you say the words Hardcore Carnivore now, and it means so much. On a base level, it started off as a seasoning, and we have 9 different Hardcore Carnivore seasonings in the line now. And then it expanded into some tools. So we have our own barbecue butcher paper or peach paper. We have some trimming knives and things like that. It's also the name of my cookbook, but it is also the name of my TV show that debuts on September 23rd on the Outdoor Channel. So we filmed 10 episodes for season 1. We're in the middle of filming season 2 right now, and it's a whole look at everything, all things meat. So whether it's hunting or visiting ranches, there's cooking. So it's a really exciting time because the Hardcore Carnivore empire is growing.
And it's on the Outdoor Channel.
It is on the Outdoor Channel.
Just so people know. And that's the last thing you just, sorry, I said I was going to let you go, but one last thing here. Sourcing, like you've gotten into the whole Texas, I'm going to source my meat. I'm going to go out and get my meat and do all that. You know, what's the impetus, the gist behind that?
You know, when I moved here, I was very gung-ho about having the full Texan experience. And whether that was understanding football or, you know, driving a truck or learning to two-step, whatever, a big part of that was hunting as well. It's such a core part of Texan culture. And it also linked into, you know, I was an online meat advocate. I was telling people to cook all this meat and how much I loved eating meat. And I do eat meat 7 days a week. But I felt a responsibility to be able to go through the whole journey from start, literally pulling the trigger, being able to process that animal myself all the way through to cooking, just to see if I could do it. And then once I did it, it was a very empowering thing. And it's something that I enjoy continuing to do during hunting season.
So venison is on your table.
Oh, heck yeah. Venison chili is like pretty much the only chili my husband will eat now.
I'm in a chili cook-off in about a month. I'm going to make venison chili. So that's not necessarily my wheelhouse, but I'll give it a whirl. Listen, man, this has been a lot of fun, Jess, and we love having you on. I know a lot of people are learning a lot. So don't be a stranger. I'll hit you up somewhere down the road again. And if there's anything else you want to make sure people know about what you have coming outside of the TV show and Hardcore Carnivore, here's your stage right now.
Follow me on social, Jess Pryles, Pryles, or you can follow Hardcore Carnivore. We do different stuff on different channels, and I appreciate your great questions and look forward to meeting you all online. Yes, and next time I'm in Austin, I'll hit you up. All right, that's Jess Pryles. Coming up next is the Smoking Hot Tip of the Week with DJ Menzel from Texas Star Grill Shop. We'll do it again, Jess. Thank you for joining us. Appreciate you.